Round 18 in Marina Bay for the Singapore Grand Prix. Lando took home the win with almost a perfect weekend here last year. Can he do it again? Could Oscar have a bounce-back weekend and make it back onto the top step of the podium? Or will Max Verstappen keep the streak going and really give us something to think about in the Drivers' Championship race? We have a lot more to talk about as we head into the Singapore Grand Prix, and it's all coming up next on the Chicanery Podcast. Back in Marina Bay. It's another street race, the second in a row and second to last of the season. And of course, we're under the lights too. It's never really a good sign for the drivers when we're racing at night because that usually means the race is going to be pretty hot. And a lot of drivers say this one is one of the hardest, if not the hardest of the year because of the extreme heat and humidity you get here. And it's another circuit where the walls are right up against the track and there's just very little room for air. So you add in the mental fatigue that comes with racing in conditions like this at a track that's just so unforgiving. It's not a surprise that we see a safety car almost every single race. In fact, it's been 14 out of 15 races with a full safety car period since this race moved to the Marina Bay circuit. So there's a good chance we get one of those this weekend. And don't be surprised if some rain showers pop up too. Right now the forecast looks like it will miss qualifying and the race on Sunday. But you never know in a place like this, where storms literally build up out of nowhere. Pirelli is going with the same tire compounds as last year's race, the C3, C4, and C5. So if it is a dry race, the teams have the data, and I would expect the same strategies that we saw last year, starting on the mediums and then switching to the hards somewhere in between laps 25 to 30. Strategy is probably going to be even more important on Sunday, though, because this isn't really a track where you can make a lot of overtakes. There are really only 3 areas of the track going into turn 7, 14, and 16, but it's still not easy there. So qualifying on Saturday is going to be extremely important, especially for the top 3 drivers in the championship, because this race will probably tell us a lot about where this championship is headed. Starting with McLaren, it's now been a while since their last win, but you'd expect them to be the favorites this weekend. This is a track that really favors their car with the high downforce setup. And Lando's always been strong here. P7 in 2019 when the car really wasn't that great. But P4 in 2022, P2 in 2023, and of course the win in what was almost a Grand Slam weekend last year. There's something about this place with Lando that really fires him up and brings out the best in him. And it's interesting because usually this would be a track that would favor Oscar's driving style a little more. And the results haven't been bad for Oscar here either. P7 in 2023, P3 last year. But Lando blew him out of the water last year, finishing 41 seconds ahead. I am expecting it to be a lot closer between the two drivers this year, though. And we've seen it with Oscar this season before, where we're at a track where Lando was miles ahead of him in 2023 or 2024. But Oscar shows up, and he's on pace with Lando, or even ahead of Lando. But an interesting twist to this weekend is how exactly does Oscar bounce back after Baku? We never see that kind of weekend from him. And a crash is bound to happen to every driver from time to time, but 2 in a race weekend in qualifying and the race, never a good sign. And the timing of this happening makes you think, all right, we're in the home stretch of the season. It's coming down to the wire with his teammate, maybe even Max in the championship race. Oscar's never been in this situation in F1 before. So is all of the pressure really starting to get to him, and are we starting to see some cracks? Or was it just a bad weekend? Nothing more, nothing less. I think at least for this weekend, we're going to see a much better Oscar, the normal Oscar. He'll be on pace with Lando. But who comes out ahead? Again, and especially for these two, qualifying will be maybe the most important part of the weekend. If one of these drivers starts a row ahead of the other, that might be all they need to stay ahead. No matter what happens this weekend between the two drivers, though, it should be a great weekend for the team. They missed the mark last race, but this is probably going to be the weekend McLaren clinches the Constructors' title. It was a lot more complicated in Baku, but this week, they just need to score 13 points to take home the title. So basically, they just need one of their drivers to make it onto the podium, or have both at least finish P6 and P7. Seems easy enough based on what we've seen with them, so expect some championship celebrations on Sunday. McLaren might be the favorites, but that doesn't mean we can count out Max and Red Bull, which is a little surprising to say for this weekend because Max has never won here, and this has probably been Red Bull's worst track the last few years. Max did get P2 last year, but before that, P5 in 2023, P7 in 2022, and that was when Red Bull was at its peak. But their weakness has always come with the high downforce tracks, and that's what we have here. But has Red Bull figured these things out and solved some of their problems? Because we knew they'd be fast in the straights in Baku, but they weren't supposed to be that dominant in the low-speed corners, and that was where Max gained most of his ground on the rest of the field during that race. So we know they figured out the low-speed corners, but will that also translate to a track like this, where it's high downforce instead of low? The last track we had that had similar characteristics was Hungary, and that was an awful weekend for Red Bull. But they've shown me a lot the last two race weekends, and I just have a feeling we're at least going to see Max up there at the top, fighting for pole, and maybe even a race win on Sunday. Like the McLarens and really all of the teams, qualifying will be the key. Can Max put together the lap he needs in Q3 on Saturday? Because if he's on pole, or at least on the front row, and he has a chance to take the lead going into the first corner, that clean air could be exactly what he needs to manage this race and make it 3 wins in a row. But if Max qualifies down the order a little bit, it could be a much different story. He might still have the pace to make his way up the front, but how much time will he waste being stuck behind slower cars or in DRS trains while the McLaren speed away ahead? But if Max can manage another win this weekend, if we see Oscar finish third or lower, the talk around this championship fight is going to get very interesting because that'll tell us that Red Bull's figured it out across the board. Those wins in Monza and Baku weren't track specific, and they have a car that can compete anywhere. I still think it's going to be a long shot for Max to really catch up and win the title. But if anything, he'll at least ramp up the pressure and give Oscar and Lando something to think about. It's another big weekend for his teammate Yuki Tsunoda with his future with the team still up in the air. Again, I think it's over for him, but the team is still leaving the door open, and Yuki has turned a few heads lately. He's had some promising results. He went 7 straight races, finishing outside of the points during the summer, but he's made it into the points 2 out of the last 3 races. And Yuki has the upgraded floor now. It was just Max who had it in Monza, which explains why he won that race and Yuki only finished 13th. But 2 weekends ago in Baku, both drivers had that upgrade, and that's why we saw Yuki a lot closer to Max and higher up the order. I think if he wants a shot at keeping this seat, or at least keeping the conversation alive, it has to be a top 5 finish. Something to really impress Helmut Marko and Laurent Mekies and the others making that decision. But a big part of that for this weekend is probably out of Yuki's control. Max will be ahead of him. The 2 McLaren should too. But where will Mercedes be this weekend? Where will Ferrari be? I'm expecting Mercedes to be pretty competitive this weekend. I don't know if they'll be competitive enough and have the race pace for a win on Sunday. But George on pole? George on the podium? Certainly not out of the question. Their car does really well at the high downforce tracks. And that's great timing for them because this is an important weekend for the team in terms of the constructors' standings. It's starting to get really tight between 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Mercedes took back 2nd after the results in Baku, but coming into this weekend, it's Mercedes in 2nd with 290 points, Ferrari in 3rd with 286, and Red Bull in 4th with 272. Can Mercedes hold these 2 teams off in the final 7 races, especially with the surging Red Bull team coming off back-to-back wins? But like the Drivers' Championship, this weekend will also be very telling as to where the Constructors' race is headed for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th spots. If Red Bull has a track like this figured out too, Mercedes is in trouble, and that 18-point deficit can easily be made up. But if Mercedes finishes ahead of them, and we find out some things with the Red Bull car are a little more track-specific, it's a different story. And this team will be a lot more hopeful heading into the final 6 races, especially with a promising result this weekend. But a lot of it, both with Red Bull and Mercedes, is going to come down to the second driver. It was a rough stretch for Kimi there in the middle of the season, but maybe he's turned a new leaf. P9 in Monza, P4 in Baku. he might be getting back to the form we saw from him to start the season. And maybe he just did need some time off during the summer break. But this team desperately needs him to keep it going for this final stretch of the season. Kimi doesn't need to do anything spectacular, but we need consistent P4, P5, P6 finishes from him to really put the team in a good spot in the standings. It's going to be a tough weekend for Kimi, though. He's never raced in Singapore. He's never dealt with the heat and humidity and exhaustion. He's never figured out how close he can get to the barriers. And that's the scary part for him and the team this weekend, because we've seen Kimi make a handful of mistakes at other tracks, and it's a lot easier to make them here. I'm a little worried at how bad it'll be for Ferrari this weekend. Things can get a little tricky with them when it comes to the high downforce tracks, and that's usually where we see their cars start to slide around in the corners. But the bigger problem at the high downforce tracks is a problem we've seen way too many times with them this year. Plank wear. And I haven't seen much that tells me Ferrari's done really anything to fix that issue. We just haven't been at tracks lately that expose it as much. We'll have to wait for Sunday and see if this is a problem for them as the race progresses, because they'll hide it in the free practice sessions. It won't really show up in qualifying, and they might have a decent Saturday, but I still wouldn't be surprised if we start hearing some lifting and coasting talk over the radio, and both drivers start falling down the order as the race goes on. It should be a points finish for Charles and Lewis on Sunday, but the best either can probably do this weekend is P5. And even that might be a stretch. All right, let's get to some midfield talk. It was a huge boost in confidence for Williams and Carlos Sainz last time out in Baku. But could it be another magical weekend for the team? Odds are probably not. James Vowles has already come out and tempered some of the expectations for this weekend, because this hasn't been a track that's been kind to Williams in the past. And it probably won't be this weekend either. Their strength comes with low downforce and the long straights, and we just don't really have that here. So odds are they're probably going to struggle this weekend. Maybe they can still make it into the points, depending on where the other midfield teams are, but with the overtaking difficulties, it's going to come down to qualifying, which has been a weakness for Williams most of the year. So there's a good chance this weekend will probably be an uphill battle for the team. I'm a little worried it won't be a great weekend for Racing Bulls either. Like Williams, they're just not great at the high downforce tracks. And even with the success that we've seen from them this weekend, we're probably going to see a dip from them. And like it is for Kimi, this will be the first race in Singapore for Isaac Hajar, which I guess I need to apologize for putting an American twist on his name, saying Isaac Hajar. Thanks to the Fast and Curious podcast, he had the opportunity to politely correct us on how his name is really pronounced. For his teammate, though, I'm really interested to see if we get a clean weekend from Liam, or if he just causes more chaos like he usually does. Because like it is for Yuki, there's a lot of uncertainty and pressure regarding Liam's future. And does that uncertainty turn into more desperation on the track? If I'm putting money on any midfield team to make it into the points on Sunday, I've got it on Aston Martin. You look at the results in Hungary, which is probably our best indicator for this weekend. It was Aston's best weekend of the year with a P5 and P7 finish. I don't know if they'll finish that high, but I'm expecting at least one of their drivers to finish in the points, if not both of them. Their car does really well at the high downforce tracks, and that should show again this weekend. Sauber's another team that I'm high on for this week. And again, you look at Hungary, and they were strong there, with Gabriel Bortoleto finishing P8. It'll be new for him too, though, racing around Singapore for the first time. How will he handle the elements, and will we see any close calls with the barriers? But I'm also curious to see how Nico Hülkenberg looks, though. Since his maiden podium in Silverstone, he hasn't finished in the points, which is a little surprising based on what we saw from him at the start of the season. And his teammate has really had the upper hand on him during the second half of the season. Now, Nico did come out recently and say he's been struggling with confidence, pushing the car to its limits. That's a little concerning to hear at a track like this where you need that confidence. He should have a decent car underneath him that could bring him into the points, but his level of confidence will go a long way with his ultimate result on Sunday. Haas seems pretty optimistic heading into the weekend. And it makes sense because they struggle with straight line speed. and we don't really have that here. Another rookie driver, though, experiencing Singapore for the first time with Ollie Bierman, so another one to watch for, and is specifically, how does he handle the elements? Do we see any close calls? But will they have enough for a points finish on Sunday? It'll be hard, considering where the top 4 teams expect to be and what we expect to see from Aston Martin and Sauber. But you never know with safety cars or maybe even some weather. And finally, Alpine. What is there to really even say about them? They've been at the bottom of the order most race weekends. Do you want me to say they have a magic button that they can push this weekend to turn it all around? Because they don't. And it'll probably be another weekend with another Q1 exit and both drivers finishing the race in the bottom 5. Hopefully for Franco, he can keep the car on track at least. It's kind of a shame he has to drive this car with his F1 future hanging in the balance, because you do have to wonder how much of his results have been due to the car opposed to his driving abilities. But he has had a handful of crashes this year, and he'll need to at least avoid that this weekend, which won't be that easy. Going to some podium predictions for Sunday. P3, give me Oscar Piastri. P2, give me Lando. And P1 taking home his 3rd straight win and really making the championship race interesting. Give me Max Verstappen. I have a feeling Max is going to get pole. And I have a feeling he's going to get the lead coming out of turn 1. And that's all that he's going to need. And the McLarens won't have the pace to get around him. They'll be close. They'll make it a fight. They'll make it entertaining. But I don't think it'll be enough. After that, I've got probably George Russell, P4. I think Charles, P5. Yuki, I'm expecting to be in P6. Again, might not be exactly where he needs to be to save his future, but still a good result for the team. And a promising result for him now that he has the full upgraded car. After that, P7, give me Lewis. P8, give me Kimi. After that, maybe an Aston Martin. Maybe even an Aston Martin cracks the top 6, top 7. We'll see how it goes. But I think that'll probably be the order coming out of Sunday. Before I finish up, I want to talk about some interesting silly season headlines we got earlier in the week. And not silly season for 2026. Silly season for 2027. Could Oscar Piastri go to Ferrari at some point? Is Charles Leclerc going to leave Ferrari for Aston Martin, Mercedes, maybe even McLaren? Is George Russell ever going to sign a new contract? Let's break these down one by one, because we've been getting a few headlines from this week. Mark Webber gave an interview earlier in the week and made some very interesting and surprising comments. When he was asked about rumors of Piastri going to Ferrari, Webber responded by saying, quote, "For now, he must stay at McLaren. He must complete his development, and even if Ferrari remains a point of arrival, he must achieve the final result. In the meantime, it would be better if he improved his Italian." Is there a grand scheme for Oscar to join Ferrari one day that we don't know about? Right now, Oscar's contract with McLaren keeps him on the team through the end of 2026, so this would be a move that wouldn't happen until 2027 if it did. But why would Mark Webber make those comments? Why would Oscar consider leaving McLaren at this point? Would it be smart of him to do that? Because McLaren has produced the best car by far in the last 2 years. Meanwhile, Ferrari has been floating in uncertainty for years now and just can't get themselves over the hump to be the best team on the grid. Oscar's leading the championship. But on the other hand, what if he has 2 championships under his belt by 2027? And it's been a dream of his to race for Ferrari, and he's just looking for a new challenge at that point in his career. What if the new regulations come next year, and Ferrari has it figured out and McLaren doesn't? It seems like a stretch for now, and it seems like it would be a bad decision for Oscar to make, but there could be some scenarios that come into play that make the move more attractive and logical than it seems right now. But if Oscar does move to Ferrari at some point, which Ferrari driver is out? The logical answer would be Lewis, of course, and who knows if he'll even be racing by then. But apparently, Charles Leclerc might not be on the team by then either. Another story came out earlier in the week that Leclerc's manager has held discussions with Aston Martin, McLaren, and Mercedes. This one was also very surprising because Charles was asked about his commitment to Ferrari in Baku, And he said he's all in and wants to bring this team back to the top. It's hard to imagine a move like this actually happening. I mean, Leclerc is Ferrari's golden boy. But it's no secret, his frustrations have been growing with this team. And it's been happening for a while now. How patient is he going to be? At what point does he look at his career and say, I've got to do something if I ever want to win a championship? A move to McLaren is hard to imagine, unless Oscar does decide to leave and it's just a straight driver swap between the two. Mercedes and Aston Martin, though, you could definitely see that happening if both sides wanted it to. But would that be the right move for Charles? Aston Martin is more of an unknown, but they have Adrian Newey and they finally have the facilities to compete at a high level. And with the new regulations, they could have it all figured out and make themselves very lucrative to Charles and his camp. And we know Mercedes will be somewhere up there. And the expectation is that they'll have the best engine heading into the new regulations. So if they can't get Max, I'm sure they'd love to get Charles instead. But would Mercedes be a better option for Charles than Ferrari? I think it would be. Again, a lot of this depends on where teams are in the new regulations. But Mercedes has been consistently good for over a decade. And they've got a better track record than Ferrari in the last 15 years. It would be weird to see Charles not in red, but if a Mercedes seat opened up, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he took it. And that takes us to George. When is he ever going to sign a new contract? At this point, it looks like both sides are holding out, and it's pretty obvious what's happening here. George wants more security. He doesn't want a one-year deal. He doesn't want the risk of Max, or I guess now Charles, coming in and stealing his seat. On the other hand, it's obvious Toto only wants to give him a one-year deal because he wants to leave that door open for Max or maybe Charles. And it doesn't look like he wants to give up on Kimi Antonelli anytime soon. So who gives in? Toto holds all the power in this situation. Because where else is George going to go? McLaren has their driver lineup figured out. Red Bull will be Max and probably Hajar for the next year. And for now, Ferrari is at least set with Charles and Lewis. There's really nowhere else George can go right now that's going to be a competitive option. And I think Toto knows that. And maybe it's unfair for George considering all of the years he's put into this team and the performances he's had lately and taking over the helm from Lewis after he left for Ferrari. But it's the name of the game. And it's how negotiations go in this sport. George will be on Mercedes in 2026. And it's a matter of time before that new contract is signed. But I think he's going to have to cave and agree to that one-year deal. All right, that's a wrap on today's episode previewing the Singapore Grand Prix. I don't think we're going to get a lot of overtakes during the race on Sunday. But don't be surprised if we see a chaotic qualifying with a bunch of yellow flags, a bunch of red flags. And don't be surprised if the race is like that too. Also, watch out for that weather and the possibility of rain, especially on Sunday, and how that affects strategies. I will, of course, be back after Sunday's race with another episode recapping everything that we saw this weekend. Thanks to everyone for tuning in and listening. Till next time.